Okay, there we go. Welcome everybody. It's been 2 weeks because of Tisha B'Av last week, but we actually come out of Tisha B'Av with lots of much more optimism and hope as we look forward. Welcome Clifford, welcome all the people I haven't even welcomed. I'm going to share an overview of the Shabbat reading, and eventually we'll get to the core issue, which is we're going to be talking about gratitude. I'm going to mute everybody. Please excuse me for doing so. If you need to interrupt me, please unmute yourself and speak up. Give yourself a chance. Welcome, Jonathan. Good to see you. So running through an overview of the portion, which is the portion of Eikev. There's quite a lot happening, quite a busy portion today. It begins by saying that if you observe Hashem's commandments, then it will come with blessing. Eikev tishmu, and if you will listen, then V'shamar lecha Hashem will guard and keep His promise to us, and we'll be blessed in many ways. Moshe Rabbeinu tells us not to fear our enemies. Hashem will miraculously deliver them into our hands. Moshe instructs the people to destroy the idols that they will find in the land of Canaan. And then he goes, in retrospect, looking backwards and speaking about the years that they had together in the desert. He said there were many tests and miracles during the last 40 years in the desert. And he begins to recount various episodes. Briefly, although they all were filled with great drama, the episode of the spies, and the fact that there was a consequence that we were destined to spend 40 years in the desert as a result of the negative report from the spies, and that whole generation would die out. So Moshe Rabbeinu is now in his 5th book, the book of Deuteronomy, talking to a different generation. He's not talking to the generation of the Exodus. He's talking to the generation that would enter into the land, unfortunately without Moshe. But he's reminiscing about all the things that happened. He then speaks about the special features of the land of Israel and the commandment to bless Hashem after they eat, and we are sated. We're going to come back to this point because this is actually the origin of all the blessings we make over food and all the acknowledgements of Hashem, which is going to lead to the theme that we want to talk about tonight. Then speaks about good fortune in Israel should not lead them to forget Hashem. We just said they'll be sated, they'll be filled. So don't let it go to your head and then see the successes as being evident from your own efforts and your greatness and your own individual talents. Don't forget Hashem who provided you. And when we inherit the land, because it will be because Hashem promised this land to our patriarchs, and this is a fulfillment of a promise that precedes us. So don't get carried away with your successes. And then we reminded that many times how we angered Hashem, the golden calf, and other times we rebelled. So this is a long drasha going through all the histories of 40 years. And after the calf, the golden calf, there was the possibility of teshuvah, where we were able to fix the problem. And Moshe Rabbeinu reminds everyone how there was a new set of tablets that was carved out, and that would replace the shattered first tablets, shattered by Moshe when he descended from the mountain and saw them dancing around the golden calf. And then the Leviim were designated to be his holy servants because they were devoted, they did not serve the golden calf. We instructed about love and fear of Hashem and to serve him, and that Hashem chose our nation to be treasured, but also to bear huge responsibility. And then he says, I brought you to the land, and he defines the land as being dependent on rain. And that is going to actually be a blessing to us, that we are moving from a land that did not require rain at all, and we're being taken to a promised land that will always be dependent on the rain. So that means that we are constantly requiring and will have the watchful eye of Hashem. Then right towards the end of the portion, it speaks about the Shema again. Last week we had the first paragraph of Shema. This Shabbat, the reading includes the second paragraph of Shema, B'haya im Shamoah. There's a lot of differences between the first and second paragraph, many similarities and also differences. And then we're given various commandments. the commandment to pray, the commandment to wear tefillin, the commandment to put a mezuzah on our doors, and to teach the Torah to our children, which are enumerated in this second paragraph of the Shema. And the portion concludes with Hashem saying that if we follow Hashem's ways, we will easily occupy the land of Israel, and there will not be an adversary that will stand in our way, and everything is going to be good for us. That is an overview in general of all the things that it talks about in this Shabbat's reading. But now we're going to try and center and focus, as we always do, on some of the themes, some of the issues which could be derived from this portion, and most importantly, how can we apply it? Because Torah is not only a technical textbook, it's about a recipe for living and an inspiration how to live our lives, and all of that is found in every single Shabbat's reading. And when we say we should live with the times, it doesn't mean that we have to be vogue and modern in all our thinking. We should live with the times in terms of technology and being able to master it and use it. But living with the times means that we're in sync with what is the Torah teaching us this week, what is the message of this particular week. So let's now go on a journey of some of the details that are spoken about in this week's portion. Get rid of this, put this aside. Okay, the very first word and the name of this week's portion is the heel. The word Eikev means if you will listen to God's commandment, then Hashem will respond and give us blessing. But the word if you will listen is a very strange usage of the word. It actually is the word Eikev, which has another connotation and another meaning completely outside of the obvious meaning in the verse. And the Eikev means the heel. So why would it be using a word, if you will listen, I will give you blessing? And the word if is an unusual form of the word if. It actually means the heel of our foot. So there are a lot of commentaries that speak about why does it begin with a word so unusual with this connotation. One of the commentaries from the Khatam Sofer, one of the classic sources, speaks about the heel being the end. This generation prior to the arrival of Mashiach is called Ikvus de Mashiach, the heel. Just like the human body, the human anatomy has a head and then all the limbs, and the very bottom end is the heel. So the heel means the end. So the end goal, V'haya Eikev Tishma'un, the end goal is to listen and to be observant, as subservient to Hashem, and to observe His commandments. So the heel refers to the end purpose is to listen, is to be obedient. The second interpretation, which is given in the Midrash, is that, and Rashi quotes it, that the heel is what we step on. And what it's saying is that there will be, in this observance and this obedience to Hashem's word, there will always be a thought that some things don't really matter. What doesn't matter is the things that are small, little issues. If we weigh them up in terms of our analysis of what's important, this is not such an important detail. So what it's saying, don't only be observant and obedient in the things that you think are important, because you've worked out that this is obviously a big mitzvah, but this one's a small mitzvah, doesn't really matter. Be careful, because ultimately, you're not the architect, you're not the designer, you are the one who needs to be obedient to Hashem, and sometimes the littlest things do matter. I remember when it happened, I don't know if you remember the shuttle that was sent up to space, and one of them blew up as it was leaving. As it went up, as it was going through the atmosphere, it blew up and all of the astronauts perished. In fact, there was a Jewish woman, a teacher, a school teacher was on board. And I remember reading about the analysis of what was the cause of this horrific disaster. Forget about the financial cost and loss, but the loss of life. Where did they go wrong? And it actually turned out to be a seal that was a sealant between the rocket boosters, the fuel, and the rest of the ship. And that seal was an insignificant, unimportant part. By comparison to all the sophistication on board, it would have been like a part that you could get at the local builder's warehouse in one of those plastic packets. That's how simple that little seal was, as compared to the millions and billions that some of the computer technology that was on board. And I always remember thinking at the time, how a simple little detail was all important in the moment. Yes, we depend on huge, big technology and big, important, expensive apparatus, but sometimes everything is hinged on a very simple detail. And that's in life as well. We sometimes think that religion is when we reach out and we touch God and we are in an ecstatic moment of connection on Yom Kippur afternoon, which could very well be the case. And a very important day like the day of Yom Kippur, true, that is a religious moment. But sometimes religious moments are very small encounters. An encounter between one human being and another human being, a smile to another person to lift them in their time of difficulty, reaching out and saying a good word to somebody could be the smallest of things and could be a life-changing, have a life-changing effect on somebody else. So, Eikev Tishmun is the little things that we would trample on with our feet and say, who cares? This can't really be important in God's big plan of this universe and in the history of the world. And sometimes the little tiny things, tiny details are very important. So we shouldn't author God's Torah to the point that we start analyzing what is important, what's not important. If God said it's important, it's important. And finally, one of the commentaries speaks about the Eikev, meaning our feet, which that we walk, the places we go to. Rabbeinu Bachya says, Vaya Eikev Tishmuun, look at the places where our feet carry us to. Where do we frequent? Which streets, which roads? Where are we heading? What are we doing? Where are we going? Okay, I'd like to switch completely. The next detail it speaks about is the manna. And the way that it is described in the verse is that Hashem afflicted us and He starved us. And then He gave us the manna. So the manna, this beautiful gift from Hashem, is associated with Hashem starving us and afflicting us. So the Gemara, the Talmud, wants to understand what was the affliction of this manna. And it presents two specific reasons why the manna, rich as it was in blessing, was seen as an affliction. We know that the manna had many miracles that surrounded it. It could taste like anything you desired. So if you wanted to have a monkey gland steak, so it tasted on that particular night. If you wanted milchika ice cream, you could have the manna. It was amazing food. There was no waste. There was no waste product that had to be expelled from the body. There were many miracles that came through this manna. So what was the affliction? And the Talmud says there were two afflictions. The one was that a person likes to know that we have an insurance policy. We know where tomorrow is going to be secure. So although we need food for today, we live thinking about what do we have for tomorrow. And if we don't feel that we have our hand on what we need for tomorrow, then today doesn't work so well for us. That's the human nature. It's called pat besalo. When you have bread in your basket, it means that you have reserves, and you know that you have reserves. And that gives you a feeling of security today, because you know that you have what to live with tomorrow. Well, what the manna did to us was that there was no knowledge of tomorrow other than faith. Nobody could set aside a little bit of today for tomorrow, because it was only granted day by day, almost like time. Nobody can store time for tomorrow. The time that we have is what we're given today, and tomorrow we're going to be given time for tomorrow. But we can't say, I'm going to save a few minutes from today and I'll carry it over tomorrow and then I'll have a bit more time tomorrow. It doesn't work that way. So one of the afflictions of this manna was that we had to live in the shadow of faith all the time. We didn't have the capacity to take control of our tomorrow. Our tomorrow was a destiny that is intertwined with our relationship to Hashem. We had to pray and ask on a daily basis, God, Please give us our tomorrow. That's why it was seen as an affliction, because we were unable to feel the security of tomorrow. The second reason that is given is that it did not look, although we said it had miraculously tasted like anything one desired, but it didn't have the fiber. It didn't have the actual metabolism, the makeup of what it is. And when you looked at it, you probably saw what looks like oats, something like that. So you couldn't actually see the food that you were tasting. What difference did that make? If it filled you and if it tasted brilliant, what difference? Because we're into aesthetics. We like the way things look. So the two afflictions were actually a definition of human beings' inability to see blessing. Sometimes our blessings are curtailed and lessened only because of our own inability, our own weakness, that we're stuck in having to see things the way we want to see them. So even though materially we're not diminished in any way, everything is perfectly in place, but it is our own expectation and our own need to see things the way we see them, and that is a weakness that undermines and diminishes the extent of the blessing. The manna was the ultimate blessing. It was seen as an affliction because we had the inability to see it for all its blessing. It was also a situation where God starved us, and then he gave us the manna. The commentaries say, why did God starve us? So God starved us because had he come to interview us and ask us, are you ready to let go of food and I will give you manna? Would you exchange the food that you have for this miraculous food that I'm about to give you? And most likely, all of us would have said, we're not letting go. We don't want to let go. We know we feel much more secure in having what we know is what we used to. But now you're going to give us this new thing that we have to let go of. So Hashem forced us to let go. He starved us. He took us to a place where there was no food. And then we turned to God and said, help. And at that time, we were open to new possibilities. And that is a beautiful insight into the deprivation that we sometimes go through, which is really Hashem's way of filling us and giving us opportunity, brand new opportunity, better opportunity, that we ourselves would have got in the way of because we didn't want to let go. How do we apply that to today's days? I mean, isn't that obvious? Hashem's deprived us of so many of the things that we were accustomed to, were regularly in our lives. These are the most abnormal times we could possibly imagine. And it is our duty, and it will certainly serve us to have the breadth of understanding, to say, Hashem has deprived us of many things. And now there's the opportunity of filling our lives with the things that might be more important. And rather than wallowing in the suffering of the loss, and sometimes the losses are beyond, they're irreplaceable. I mean, people have suffered the loss of life, and I certainly don't address myself to that. But to many of the other inconveniences that have been placed in us, certainly a time to think about Hashem starving us so that we're open to look at things differently. One of the things that certainly impacted on me is bar mitzvahs. We've had a few bar mitzvahs, Zoom bar mitzvahs, where bar mitzvah boys have prepared themselves a whole year, and then they're not in shul to sing their portion. So they sing it on a Sunday morning on Zoom to many hundreds of their guests and friends and relatives all over the world. And it's like a sad alternative to being able to do it in shul. But let's look at some of the things that have emerged from it. Bar mitzvah boys that we've dealt with, families that we've had celebrating such bar mitzvahs, have been totally focused on how to include relatives and friends and ensure that there's a connection of people that defies the distance that we've had to have between ourselves. And very little talk about the color of the balloons and the theme of the bar mitzvah that's going to cost $250,000 rand, which is irrelevant to the whole process of bar mitzvah and becomes a total focal point of people's preparations for manhood. So there are opportunities of suddenly seeing Hashem's deprived us of some of these madnesses in our lives. We feel maybe deprived, but if we could only look with different eyes, we'll actually see that Hashem has taken away something to allow us to fill it with something much more meaningful. And some of these bar mitzvahs have in fact carried an aura of much, much more spiritual focus than has been the case in the past, when there's been indulgences and an affluence and a wastage that has nothing to do with bar mitzvah. Okay, let's move on so that we're not stuck on one subject alone. We spoke about afflicted and starved. Let's move on. We mentioned that Hashem said, I'm giving you a blessing. I'm taking you to a land which is dependent on the rain. Now, dependency is often seen as a shortcoming. When you're dependent on something that is, unfortunately, you're not self-sufficient. Now, what would we rather choose? Would we choose the land of Egypt or a land dependent on rain? Well, if you ask any farmer, interview a farmer, a land like Egypt, which has the river Nile go into flood every single year, predictably and reliably, and all that they need to do is then build the canals and the shadufs and the various implements that are able to bring the water from the Nile to their fields alongside the river. That is an absolute reliable situation. And I remember Mr. Leon Medali, who was the president of our shul, would tell me, he would say to me, you know what it is for a farmer? A farmer spends his whole year working every morning. He's up at 4 in the morning, 3 in the morning, he's out there. So in the cool of hours of the morning, he can do all the job. But there comes a moment where after all of your work, you lift your eyes to the sky and you humbly say, Hashem, please make it rain. This depends on more than my effort. That is a debility, it's a dependency which could make us feel less than secure. But on the other hand, it is a totally different environment in which we live. Everything about Pharaoh in Egypt was, I am the king, I am the master, I'm God. So he saw himself as being totally self-sufficient to the point that he excluded any possibility of growth. It became a decrepit, arrogant society that was immoral and had no future. The great glory of the land and all of its wealth was ultimately going to be ancient Egypt with ancient pyramids. But what was going to be alive was a people born out of Egypt that was going to leave that Egypt behind and was going to exchange a land of absolute reliable sustenance for a land of dependency and communication and relationship with God, and having a connection to Hashem. And we're going back to the whole story of the manna and everything we've spoken about, where the deficiency is in fact its greatest strength. And ultimately, what is the recipe of a nation that is going to exist for thousands of years and transcend the passage of time, and not just be important because we once had pyramids many thousands of years ago, but important because today we're a living, alive nation that is creative and able to give so many gifts to the world? It's because we were not smug and self-centered and arrogant and believing that everything is in ourselves. It was our surrender to a higher power and our recognition that we were dependent on it that ultimately gave us the power and the strength to transcend the passage of time and to grow as time went by. And that is our ability to have emunah, to wake up every morning with our Jewish belief that there is a creator, there is a God, and that fills our place. And the security in self, the belief that everything's up to me, kochi ba'atzim yadi, it is only up to my intelligence and my brilliance and my accomplishment, can make us feel good in the short term. It does not have a recipe for long-term survival. That is not a generational thing. We need to depend and to be connected on something infinite. And that is our relationship with Hashem. The land that we entered into and its promise and its beauty was described as a land dependent on rain. And that meant dependent on a relationship that we were going to have with Hashem that was going to give us so many things. So we're going to move on, and I want to get to our theme, which is to have gratitude. Why is that connected to this week's portion? Because amongst the many words that Moshe Rabbeinu tells us, he says, Ma Hashem Elokecha Sha'el Me'imach. What is it that God is asking of us? Ki im liyir'ah, all he is asking us is to fear Hashem. Ma Hashem Sha'el Me'imach. What is God asking of us? And the Talmud in Brachot, which our motley crew of Great Park Gemara learners, please join us. These days it's at 8:30 till 9 o'clock. We're in the tractate of Rosh Hashanah, no previous experience required, and it's a daily amazing start to the day. We learned in the tractate of Brachot 2 years ago that this verse is interpreted to mean, in addition to its simple meaning, Ma is related to the word Me'ah, which means 100. Me'ah Hashem Sho'el Me'imach. Hashem is asking us to do 100 blessings a day. Now, how do we get to 100 blessings a day? Is a calculation. And the calculation is a process of our morning blessings that we say as we get up. And then we have blessings through davening, and then there's Shemona Esrei, which has 19 blessings. And the repetition when we answer Amen, and that happens a few times a day. And then we have food, and we bench. And if we add up all of them on a regular day, we for sure have 100 blessings. And on Shabbos, we sometimes have to go through the extra effort of eating a few more candies and chocolates and a cup of tea or whatever to make sure that we get to the full amount of 100 blessings. Why do we need blessings? Why does God need us to bless him every single day? Does God wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I hope today is going to be a popularity day, and I hope my people are going to give me my full 100 today? Who needs the blessing? And so obviously, what is required is for us, for ourselves, for a redefinition of our life. We need to make blessings, because a blessing is an act of appreciating a gift that was given to us and being grateful for it. And the prime teacher blessing that is found in this week's portion are the words, achalta, you will eat, v'savata, and you'll become satisfied, v'uverachta, and then you will bless Hashem. There's actually two. There are only two blessings that are biblical, that are actually found in the Torah. One is a physical blessing, a blessing for a physical gift, and the other is a blessing for a spiritual gift. The blessing this Shabbat is the physical. You'll eat, you'll become satiated, and then you will bless Hashem. So the blessing is for food, and to acknowledge after eating that it came from Hashem. The only other blessing that is biblical is found in the portion of Ha'azinu just before Rosh Hashanah, or between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur actually. And there, the blessing is related to Torah. It says, Ki Shem Hashem Ekra, Havu Godel Elokeinu. When you're about to proclaim the word of Hashem, you should proclaim the greatness of God, and we make a blessing. That blessing is the blessing we say when we get called up to the Torah, Baruch Hu et Hashem HaBarak, Baruch Hashem HaBarak L'Olam Va'ed. So that blessing is the blessing for spiritual food. That's the Torah, teachings of the Torah. And this week we talk about the only other blessing that is required in Torah from the biblical verse, which is food. And from there the rabbis say, well, if you have to say thank you to God after you have eaten, then surely it would be appropriate to acknowledge God before we eat and to say please. And not only when we've eaten we satiated, but even when we eat a little bit, and even when we have any enjoyment. And what about the joy of smelling a sweet aroma and being revived, like on Yom Kippur afternoon when you need a little bit of smelling salts, so there's a blessing for spices and for beautiful aromas, and there's blessings for all of the experiences of life that we would enjoy. When we hear good news, there's a bracha. When we have a brand new event in our lives, when we witness a shooting star, or even a phenomenon of nature, we acknowledge that this too comes from Hashem. There's blessings all the time. And we come back to the point as who needs the blessing? And God certainly does not have a bad day or a good day based on how many blessings he gets. The blessings is for us. And gratitude, as we said in the quote, in the invitation, might not be able to change what we have, but it gives us a whole new insight, a whole new approach to what it is that we do have. And I want to go into that journey. The name of the Jewish people is Yehudi, which comes from the tribe of Yehuda. And Yehuda was so named by his mother, Hapam Odeh et Hashem, I will now give thanks to Hashem. The meaning of the name Jew is thank you, acknowledgement. I have a reason to say thank you. The first words we say when we wake up in the morning is Modeh ani lefanecha. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me my soul, restored and refreshed. First words on our lips every single morning. And then we go through the blessings every morning. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me the ability to discern between light and darkness, day and night. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me clothes to wear, my shoes. Thank you for giving me a belt that can pull my clothing on. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me sight. Thank you, Hashem, for giving me ability to hear, to understand, to learn. We have blessed. Thank you, Hashem, for making me free. I'm not a slave. I might not have thought about that because I woke up and I didn't really expect to be a slave. But there is a blessing every single day that says, thank you, Hashem, for making me free. I might not have noticed. I could have lived this day without even thinking about the possibility of not being free. And I'm all the richer for looking at my life and saying, Hashem, it didn't have to be this way. I always say that there's an inverse proportion between entitlement and gratitude. The more we feel entitled, the less gratitude we have. And the less we feel entitled, the more gratitude we have. And when we talk about our children, and we raise our children, and there is an expectation and an entitlement that is unbridled. Kid wakes up in the morning, you owe me, the world owes me everything. And nothing is good enough. And whatever we've given is somebody else has more. And how come and it's not fair because I believe I should have much more. So that is a life in which there is very little chance to be grateful because one's eyes are always looking and saying, what more could I be entitled to? That's a sad place to be. It's a very wanting place to be. It's a very poor place to be because we're always deprived and we always have less than we need. And the richest person could be somebody who doesn't really have. There's the famous story of the Mittel Rebbe and one of the Hasidim where somebody was asking how to deal with loss. He had a businessman, important businessman, he'd lost a deal and his life was falling apart. So he went to his Rebbe and he said, please help me, how do I deal with loss? He said, you've got to go to a certain chassid and he'll teach you. He's the master. He knows exactly how to deal with loss. So he goes to this chassid who was a very, very poor chassid. He had nothing. When he came to him, he actually saw that he had a broken home with no windows and he lived in a shack. And he said, I've come to you because I believe you're the teacher of how to deal with loss and the tragedy of being deprived. And the chassid said, that is astonishing that you'd be sent to me. I've never in my life been deprived of anything. Hashem has given me everything I needed from the day I was born. And suddenly this wealthy person who had suffered one setback, his life had fallen apart, suddenly realized that what one needs is a change of headspace. One needs to look and think differently and to be appreciative of all the things that we do have. I always say that the Hebrew word for wealth is ashir, ayin, shin, yud, resh. And ashir is an acronym for 4 Hebrew words. Ayin means einayim, our eyes. Shin is shinaim, our teeth. Yud is yadayim, our hands. Resh is raglaim, our feet. If we woke up in the morning and stood in front of the mirror and said, let me count my blessings. Look what Hashem's given me. Look what I do have. Look at the wherewithal I have to get through this day. Let me think about all of the details that Hashem has given me. So you're a wealthy person. You could have very little and be wealthy. And by contrast, you could live in an absolute mansion with enough money to live generations. and wake up every single morning frustrated and angry and feeling so small because your expectations of what you should have had were not met that day. That's a terribly sad place to be, so deprived that you cannot count your blessings. And that's why when we come to shul, that's what we say. Thank you, Hashem, for this detail, for that detail. Let me think about it. Let me think about the fact that I'm not a slave, that I'm free, that I'm able to get up and make a decision in my own life and not be beholden to a master who would control my next move. That should not be taken for granted. That should be something I think about, that I am grateful, Hashem, for giving me this opportunity, that I can see, that I can carry myself, that I can sustain myself. I can have teeth to eat. I have the simple things that make me a wealthy, rich person, if I only have the eyes to look at life that way. There's a famous story of a teacher of mine, Reb Mendel Futterfass, who you've heard about many occasions. And there was a story that he was once in the Gulag, which he was for 13 years, for helping save Jewish lives and get visas illegally for them to leave the country and to help with Torah and mitzvahs. For that terrible crime, he was separated from his family and was in a gulag, and many people didn't survive. And people cried. People would bemoan their fate, that they'd lost their good fortunes. People had been wealthy. And Reb Mendel was always smiling. He was that kind of person. He lost, I remember, while I was in Israel studying, he lost a child in a car accident. He was an incredible human being who rose above tragedy and was a source of inspiration to everybody. So he was always like smiling, so everybody else was wallowing. And somebody once said to him, so obviously the reason why you are in a good disposition is because you didn't lose anything. You see us now. If you only saw us a few years ago, when we were back in our businesses, we were wealthy people, and I was a doctor, and I was a lawyer, and I was academic, and I was professional, and I had money. So obviously you're happy because you didn't have anything. But unbeknown to them, this Reb Mendel was a lumber merchant. He actually was a very wealthy person. He'd lost maybe more than most of the people. And he said to them, the reason why I don't wallow in the sense of loss is because I was never defined by the assets I owned. If I was Reb Mendel the wealthy one, Mendel the merchant, now suddenly I'm not. I'm deprived of everything, and I would be depressed. But even when I had my business, I wasn't Mendel the merchant. I was Mendel the child of Hashem, Mendel the Jew, Mendel the tefillin wearer, Mendel the person who learned Torah and attended a shiur. And all of those things that I was is what defined me. And they took away my wealth. They didn't take away my being. They didn't take away my reason to live. They didn't take away why I would be noticed by anyone as being important, because that was not what was important in the first place. So the shift of headspace, a person who wakes up and is grateful and thinks about all of the things that I want to enumerate, not just think about, we say the blessings every single day. We actually say the blessings, because we laboriously, repetitively say it every day, so that we actually get our minds tuned in every morning to an attitude of gratitude. And that changes not for Hashem, it doesn't change anything for God. It changes everything for ourselves. It changes the way our lives become valuable and important, because Hashem is so meaningful and gives us the ability to celebrate each meaningful moment in our life. So if anything is retained from this gathering, is to think about the things that we can say thank you for. Not think about all the things we should have had and could have had and entitled to have had and we've been deprived of and it's not fair, but rather to have the headspace and the disposition of saying, let me think about the things that I do have. In the relationships, in a marriage, in our children, in ourselves, in our connection and ability to talk to Hashem, all of the simple things, the little things that we spoke about at the beginning, could be very meaningful things to us if we only look at our lives differently. So that is the power of having the humility. The word ma also is associated with humility, that we recognize that there's a power bigger than ourselves. And this recipe of 100 blessings a day is a change of where we live. So it's moving to a different domicile, different place, different home, different living environment, and could give us a wealth. I also share a message that it speaks about in the Talmud, that there's two verses that seem to contradict one another. The one verse says, Hashamayim shamayim la'Hashem, va'aretz natan libnei adam. The heavens are for God, and the earth is for man. So that verse seems to be saying that the spiritual domain is God's, and the physical domain is human beings. And the other verse says, La Hashem ha'aretz umlo'ah. Hashem owns the heaven and the earth. So why does one verse say that God owns the earth too, and the other verse seems to say that we have an entitlement to the earth? And the Gemara explains, Kan. Here it's before you say the blessing, and here it's after you say the blessing. So the redefinition of our lives is that before we say the blessing, who said we have a right to it? The earth doesn't really belong to us. Everything belongs to God. But when we change our attitude and acknowledge the force of Hashem and express gratitude to Hashem, that is our means of saying please, and then having the rights to an earth which we don't necessarily have rights to, but by the acknowledgement of the presence of Hashem in our lives and saying thank you, saying the blessing, we actually thereby have the rights to partake of the physical world. I'm going to try and move on and say two more things. There's a interesting response to the story of the tablets that were broken and shattered, where Moses reminds us that we went through that terrible mistake. And then God came to us and said, Psal lecha shnei luchot, hew out for yourself a set of two new tablets, which will replace the original tablets that were shattered. But the wording that is used, and in Torah, like, it's not just the content. It's so important to know the information. But the word choice and the language in Hebrew, in Lashon HaKodesh, in the Holy Tongue, connotes so much more than can ever be translated in an English translation Chumash. So it's good to read the English so we know what's going on, but it's good to be aware of the fact that words translated only capture a very minimal amount of the big picture. It's strange that Hashem, who was now trying to repair the terrible sin of dancing around the golden calf, and what was the word that God used to describe the golden calf? He said in the Ten Commandments, Lo taseh lecha pesel. Don't make for you a pesel. Pesel means an idol, a graven image, a form. What is a form? Pesel. Now, of all the words God used when he wanted to instruct us to engrave a new set of tablets, what is the verb that he uses? And there are many words in Hebrew that could be used to engrave. Chakika, for example, is one of the words. He uses the word psol lecha, form out for you the new tablets. Incidentally, the first tablets were made by God, and the gift from God did not last very long. The second tablets were hewed by Moses' hand himself. He had to chisel out the letters. And interestingly, what we work on our own, what we have to work for, lasts a lot longer. The second tablets lasted. But it's interesting that God would use the word that is associated with idols, the form of an idol, pesel, is the very word that he uses when he says, form out the tablets, and the word for form out is the same word, psol lecha. Why would God do that? There are many insights, but I just want to share one interesting thought. You know, we do get involved with form. Immediately after we were reprimanded for making a golden calf, God said, make for me a sanctuary. And these are the dimensions. And this is its physical form. And there'll be items made out of gold. And on top of the ark, there'll be the form of the cheruvim, the cherubs, that will be made out of gold and would have form. If God was wanting us to learn a lesson that gold had caused us to descend into serving an idol, perhaps the best recipe would have been, don't touch gold, ever. Stay away from gold. Never have a form. Don't get involved with the physical forms of this world, because look what it did to you there. Hashem doesn't do that. Life's more complicated than that. Hashem says, of course you need to have physical form in this world, and it's going to have a dimension, and it's going to have a size and shape, and I'll describe exactly how it is. You're going to put on tefillin every day, and it's going to have form. It's going to be black, and it's going to be square, and it's going to have the following size, and it's going to have the following detail. And every mitzvah is made up of physical form. What's different? So the Gerer Rebbe says so beautifully that in the Ten Commandments it says, Lo taseh lecha pesel. Don't make for you a form. Where does the you come? The you comes first. When Hashem says to Moses, form out for you the Ten Commandments, the second tablet, it says, form for you. Where does the word you come? The word you comes after. Not lecha pesel, psol lecha. Where you feature is after, not initiating. If you are the author and the authority that determines what is significant in form, it's an idol. Who are we to determine a spiritual value to physical form? Never. That is the definition of an idol. But when we come after, we're not the author. We are the follower. We are the instructed. We are the ones that are receiving the word of Hashem, and whatever form and gold that we have in this world is by virtue of Hashem's instruction. If we enter into the arena after rather than being the author, that's a whole different world. Then the physical form that is valuable to us is because God said so, not because we said so. And when God says tefillin is important, then it becomes a spiritual thing. It's holy and it has a value. And we kiss it when it falls, even though it's a physical form, because it's not our physical form, it's God's instruction as to being important. So where do we put ourselves in the equation is always a big deciding factor in all of the idols of our life. When we think we author success, as we started off saying, it could land up being an idol. We could be the idol. We could be serving ourselves. When we are the product of Hashem, and dependent on His reign, and dependent on His manna, and we realize that we are recipients, so having to be grateful to what it is that Hashem has given us. When we are second to God's instruction, that's when we are in an arena where physical things can matter spiritually, because they are the fulfillment of God's purpose. If we think we are the authors of purpose, we're on a recipe to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, to being left with ancient pyramids. But if we are humble enough to acknowledge that it is Hashem who determines the values and the important elements and the pursuits that we have to follow, then physical form has value according to the dictates of Hashem. The physical world is necessary. Gold could be an incredibly valuable asset which could be used to build a sanctuary for Hashem. It's not about becoming ascetic human beings that are removed from this world in our spiritual pursuits. We're involved in a physical world with a recipe given to us by Hashem. So I end off by saying, may Hashem always give us the ability to be humble enough, to be individuals who don't feel entitled but feel grateful, who recognize that Hashem is who makes it rain in our life, and be dependent on that rain. We can't determine our tomorrow better than being dependent on Hashem and having a relationship with Him that we service every single day. And that way we're the richest people in the world. And we have so many blessings that we are able to enumerate. Thank you for joining. I'm going to unmute everybody so we can say good night. I thank everyone for joining. It's always special to spend time with the community. I miss you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank
you,
you.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I didn't see you before. Thank you for being here, Mark Bloomberg.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. See you in the morning. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Raz.
Thank you, Rabbi. Nice to hear your words.
Your picture is smiling at me the whole time. I just hope you like your picture. Just live up to your picture and always be smiling. Lynette, I see you here. How is Ralph doing today? Please unmute yourself. Lynette? Here we go. Can you hear me, Lynette?
I can hear you. Yeah. Thank you.
Today? How is Ralph today?
Okay. Better. Thank you. Getting better. Thanks.
That's wonderful news. May it be better tomorrow and even better the next.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining. Thank you, Jeff, for joining. Thank you, John, for joining. Daniel, good to see you. Welcome. Thank you, Fagi. Nice to see you on the Zoom. Jeff, send regards. I still don't know who Dasi is. Don't tell me it's my family Dasi. Okay. Over and out. God bless.